why do we have an expectation that we have to get out of complexity? Are we scared we're going to fail, or scared we're not going to make enough money, or like what? Why did we unlearn that?
I think it's many things, but I think over time we've become addicted to certainty. We like things to be predictable. We like stability. If you think about it, the last few decades, so let's say after the Second World War, we've had this almost like an abnormal time of relative stability, and we've gotten used to it. And now we have all of these predictive technologies as well. So I think it's Esther Perel. I was listening to one of her podcasts. Yeah. And she said, we are living in this form of assisted living, where Spotify tells you what to listen to, Netflix tells you what to watch. It's like we no longer make decisions ourselves. And so now we're kind of live in this world where we expect everything to be stable and certain. And so we've almost unlearned how to be with uncertainty. And we don't like discomfort.
Just as you're chatting, it brings something, and the whole idea of home and work. I'm glad you stepped on, because it's so fascinating. My eldest has just started, very bright kid, bumped up a year.
Your genes?
No, definitely not. But the one thing and it's something we share, is had to choose subjects for the last 3 years of school, and was strong in the sciences, but also strong in art. And I said, well, and school's quite small, so you have to do art at a sort of academy off the premises. And I said, I'll do art, because if you're doing science and biology and stuff, it's just a nice antidote. And a couple of weekends ago, just comes with this idea and wants to recreate the Tower of Babel. And next thing is paper mache everywhere. And I'm kind of sitting there, but like, where's your plan? And then I realized, I'm sounding like my dad now. Like, where's your plan? He was a project manager, constantly said, where's the plan? Where's the plan? But I saw this child deal with the complexity and the planning in a very natural way. And I felt myself having to sort of challenge my own thinking. And the background is, it's just not right. You can't do a project this big without doing a smaller one. And then I'm going, hang on, I'm questioning my conversations about scale. This child was not scared of scale. It's building something, big. It's taking over our house. It's just getting bigger and bigger. But that freedom around complexity was actually reassuring. And is that, Al's working backwards towards technique. Whereas we're taught, and I think this is a problem with the workplace, we work forward from getting the basics right to complexity. And we've got to think of the younger people coming into our workforce, they're more familiar with complexity. We've gone through an experience of all our managers over time have said, deliver something that is predictable. And now suddenly, delivering a predictable, consistent outcome isn't really what the market wants. So that's weird. That's a different space to be in. Yeah. So I think we should be encouraging complexity and allowing people to sort of have these ideas and work backwards, instead of sort of saying, oh, there's this new technology, but if you do all of these things, you get to play with that new
Give us a practical example.
So I think, literally a conversation the other day with a customer, and they're saying, oh, we really want to kind of have these forums when people just come up with ideation around AI. And I'm going, okay, that's great. You inherently going into complexity. But let's ask some really good leading questions so we can try and frame it down. So there's this technology, it's AI. What lever are you trying to pull? So it's not like I'm telling you, you have to fill out a business case. Just what lever are you trying to pull? Oh, yeah, there's a thing. Am I trying to resist churn? Am I trying to grow the market? What is this technology going to do? Then, okay, look at what is the job to be done in its simplest form. Then once you've understood what that job to be done is, to say, I want a bot that predicts, looks at my historical sales records and says, based on where this customer is now and historically where customers were, there's a churn risk. So it's a bit predictive, but there's something else to it. Okay, fine. What about this job doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to sleep, It can run 24/7. And then you start airing in towards that compute space. And then you think, oh, there's actually something quite novel about this solution. I think there's, much like my daughter's art project, there's a big idea. But all you can do is come from the sides and say, okay, what is it about the Tower of Babel that interests you? How can I, assist you with that? How can I be a companion to the technology you want to deliver? Whether it's an art project or a bot or an agent, I think you can apply the same rules.
Yeah.
There are some frameworks that you can bring in to just help sort of cement what is it you're trying to achieve.
I'm just wondering if there's actually, I can't remember if I had a conversation around this or I just thought about it. I think it was we did an ROI, we were busy with the ROI calculation for a customer. And one of the stuff you need to input is the average salary for that person in that function that we're trying to automate. And with my partners in the Middle East, you see the variance in salaries is massive, right? So I'm just wondering if it's part of our challenge here is to the economics doesn't make sense at the moment. I'm asking if it does. So a lot of these easily trodden paths in the forest that people are trying to automate is trying to replace work done by people who's costing on average 10 to 15 grand a month. And you've got 20 of them sitting there doing the work, and then you look at the quote of the implementation and the technology to actually implement the AI, and you're thinking, this doesn't make business sense. It's still cheaper to have the humans doing this, because in South Africa, labor is cheaper than in other markets. How is that affecting the potential for us to go into and leveraging AI tools in business?
I think getting started, Lochner, is the problem. Like, I think that ROI calc is where we need to start. And I think that a lot of customers are struggling there. And I actually have a degree of empathy, because I think there's pressure from a board level and then from an investor level to say, okay, you've got to do this AI thing. And it is quite, okay, and what? And then that pressure sort of just slides downhill. And then you look at, well, it's going to cost this amount per action, per topic, whatever framework there's still going to be a cost associated to it. And it's shifting from a user-based license quite often to something that's metered. So there's other shifts commercially that are there. So in the wrong hands, it could be a reason to not do something. But I think there's a counterpoint to our South African challenge in that, yes, there are these 10,000, 15,000 rand salaries. But at the same time, I'm having conversations with customers. Why do I keep on having to bring in international resource to implement X? And I'm going, because we're not getting people out of that 15,000 rand slot. So I think the question really should be, how many companions can we bring to that person that helps them grow their career to be 25K consultants and move them on? Because previously, when I was in the SAP consulting world, I'd noticed that we were losing people. 5 years qualified, Australia, UK, Netherlands. We've got, I think, if we want to be more self-sufficient in South Africa, with technology, we've got to use technology to accelerate people's growth and not just look at their salary and how we can replace it with a bot, because it doesn't put those people on a continuum. You have to think about where that 10,000, 15,000K resource is going to be in 5 years' time. And I think that's possibly what's missing often in the equation. It's not continually replacing this 10, 15K resource with AI. No, I think that's the wrong framework.
But I like what you're saying, that I really like the word companion, because if you move from, am I replacing staff with a computer or a robot or whatever, versus how can I use tech to give my staff member a companion, then essentially what we're doing is we're removing the anxiety. Because what I'm hearing from you is that the anxiety is, am I going to make a mistake if I move to tech too quickly and then I don't make as much money because it's more expensive than my staff? Or am I going to make a mistake if I don't move to tech and then I'm behind, which brings it back to what you said earlier, And so if the tech is not a replacement but a companion, then you dissolve that issue, which gives you maybe more tolerance for the complexity.
I think something that to refer back to the zoo and the jungle, I feel, and this is a personal frustration, it feels like we are looking at this new technology that, it's one of the most powerful technologies that humans have ever had access to. And we're looking at it through a zoo mind. We're trying to essentially, how do we bring it in our organizations to make us more efficient? So we've got that efficiency lens.
But that predictability lens.
And also, I think the thing that and I'm stating it a little bit stronger than normal, like you need efficiency, yes, but you also need effectiveness. And effectiveness sometimes requires a little bit of inefficiency. You need some messiness, you need redundancy, all of these things that help you become more resilient. But what many organizations, and I have a friend, this is a real example. She's based in Sweden, and her husband, she's joined his business. They make heat pumps, and it's a scale up. They're like growing like the clappers. And she said to me the other day, her biggest frustration is that all of the AI conversations are focused around internal efficiency and replacing people, or it's the HR efficiency angle. And she said, and all the while there's technologies out there, also AI based, that can make their product 70% more effective. And so there's this internal efficiency focus that I don't necessarily feel is necessarily, going back to the forest analogy.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to look completely outside of where everybody else is looking to find the real opportunity. But we're bringing this zoo mentality, like how do we cut costs with AI? How do we, make things more efficient? And what I'm also seeing in some organizations is they're taking broken processes that should have been redesigned long ago, and now they're bringing in AI to automate things that actually it's just going to make things worse. So how do we take a step back? I love Heifetz. Ron Heifetz wrote a book, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership, and he spoke about sometimes you need to get off of the dance floor and onto the balcony. And I think sometimes when that pressure comes, executives are so in the weeds, like we just need to make a decision fast. When do you take a step back onto the balcony and look at what else? What are the patterns? Where else is there opportunities that we haven't thought about? That's not only about efficiency.
But as you're chatting, big data and predictive analytics 5 years ago was the talking point. 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I was dealing with a customer then. I was very much on the fringe of the project, and it was an equipment company, and how could we use predictive analytics to sort of say, well, at what intervals do we need to maintain, this vehicle? If it's at the coast, we need to do X. If it's up in Kumba, we need to do Y. And the proof of concept was brilliant. Where it failed was the customer had to change so many of their inherent processes because they couldn't actually handle what the machine was telling them. And I think that's 100% right. Everyone is on the dance floor, okay? And then suddenly someone changed the track and no one knew how to dance. Yeah. And it was the most amazing thing that, it was a total win. It was a completely successful proof of concept. It wasn't adopted because of the ability to actually change processes based on the new insight. Now, if you take the generative phase that we're in right now, we're aggregating content in a way that's never been done before.
Just explain that in layman's terms.
So basically, what AI mines is stuff that we've put out there. It's either historical, sitting at what would have been on your bookshelf as a kid as the encyclopedia. It's also the conversation that happened in the playground. It's also what's happening in the magazine. At no point in human history have we been able to take all three data sources and hammer them together so that when you ask a question, you get an encyclopedia's point of view, the playground's point of view, and the magazine's point of view. And it's all there in front of you. And it says, it's still nuanced enough to say, do you want to look at it from this angle or do you want to look at it from that angle? You're like, geez, of course I want to look at it. And then you go down the wormhole and you have a bit of fun with it. But this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
You're having all of these data points at once. But how can the brain handle that? Because before, if I'm doing research, I go to my encyclopedia. If I'm having a chat, I go to the playground. If I want a little bit of, slightly interesting but not heavyweight, I'd go to my magazine. Now you're thrusting all three of those things to me at once. Hang on. And, but that's possibly the negative side. But to go back to the Swedish example, that's exactly what your friend's saying. You actually need a bit of the playground and the encyclopedia to figure out what processes you can change. And I think that's where the prompt engineering, which is, funny enough, a term that everyone was talking about. Oh, we're going to have armies of prompt engineers. And 18 months ago, everyone was mad about that. Yeah. That conversation seems to have dissipated. But I still think there's a very valid play to say, ask a better question. But once you understand that the aggregation of content is really what's being mined with AI, I think that helps. Because if you point it directly at your historical processes, guess what? You're just in a predictive story again. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question, but that's the way I like to sort of frame it.
Sure. I think to try and keep it as, the risk with these type of conversations, like we said, is it's can keep too much in the abstract. And what we're trying to do here is to give not practical advice, but testimony. There's a question for you, Sonia. If prediction doesn't work in complex systems, because in effect, people are, like you said, trying to use this tech to become more predictive or efficient. If it doesn't work in a complex system, and when we say complex system, it's from the business system, the staff, the product, the software, whatever the case might be, into a bigger community complex system, into the global Iran system. So the question is, what's the skill that replaces forecasting?
So I think maybe there will be, so in any complex system, there are complicated or ordered spaces. So it's not to say that you can predict nothing. So there are some things that's still predictable. I think the problem with forecasting is, again, it's what does the forecasting give you? It gives you a sense of certainty, and it gives you a false sense of certainty.
I mean, like a weather forecast.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's very good.
Luckily, I never worked in the forecasting office. But I think it's, you even get it with things like scenario planning. Your scenario plan or your scenarios are always based on past knowledge. It's what you think is possible. So Nassim Taleb with his black swans, it's even those to some extent, you have an idea, of what might. But I think the key thing for me here is pattern intelligence. Like, can you shift your focus from trying to predict what will happen to, can I better monitor for weak signals? Where are things starting to change? Where is change bubbling under? And AI would be really good with, something like this. So it's shifting from what might happen to really being present. What is emerging? Where is there potential that nobody else is seeing? And how can I organize fast enough to be able to benefit from it? Or how do I nip an emerging risk in the bud? But sometimes what we do is, if we're forecasting, it's almost like putting blinkers on. We only monitor for the things we think we know are coming. So I think there's pattern intelligence. It's how do we monitor for weak signals? And that you need some openness for that, because some of these things you might say, well, I don't think, earlier we were talking about sugar and avocados. Yeah. It's a little bit like, can you be open to what's emerging? And then one of my favorite words recently has been discernment. I think we really lack discernment. Wisdom. So yeah, and then one last thing is, linking back to what you just said, to be able to get off the dance floor onto the balcony, you need time. And almost the one single thing I hear in all the clients that I work with is, we don't have any time to think. And it's like meeting after meeting after meeting, nobody has time. And that, I think, is really, it's one of the things that's creating so many problems in organizations, that executives and even just people everywhere, they're not taking time to think. They're just on the dance floor.
Yeah.
But that brings back to something you said earlier. You hinted towards the idea of being willing to sit with mess. and messiness, right? I think that's the scary thing about taking your time, is then you have to sit in the messiness. Then you can't just quickly fix and clean it up. And that's what people are scared of, right? So I'm thinking about this concept of radical acceptance, where you just accept reality as it is. You don't fight it. And you realize it's not a catastrophe. So it's not a catastrophe if you take your time. It's not a catastrophe if you're a tiny little bit slower than what you think the guy next to you is going.
But I think if you can I believe you've got a lot of wisdom, Karin, and discernment. That word is very important, because knowing, forecasting, understanding, and discernment is not the same thing. Why don't you expand a little bit on the discernment skill set? Because I think people out there should focus. It's not a. I wish there was a artificial wisdom instead of artificial intelligence, because a lot of this is discernment is wisdom based. It's not something you can quickly find on Claude or ChatGPT.
The thing that comes to mind for me is that I don't think you can be wise or good at discerning if you're not aware of your own blind spots and your own experience and your own fears, right? So I think that's an important thing, is I can't discern if whatever I have to predict or decisions I have to make in my company is good or bad if I don't know what I'm scared of, if I don't know where I typically miss a pattern. So which brings us back to a previous conversation about doing this alone, right? So if you're alone, it's very difficult to discern. I think there's wisdom in the voices of more people. I think there's wisdom in having good self-awareness. And I think there's a lot of wisdom and discernment if you can almost hold the tension of the dialectics. So am I in my emotional mind? Shit, I'm going to have to retrench people. We're going to lose money. I have to keep up, Or am I in my completely rational mind? This is the theory. This is how the system works. This is what the AI said. I'm just going to stick with that. But if you can combine the two and hold space for both, I think your discernment might be better.
And I'll add to that. Sorry.
No, sure.
So in the collective, I think one of the other things that contribute to this is, can you really value diversity? Like diversity of perspective. You mentioned ADHD and all this. Can you actually, because that's where I think real wisdom comes, is if you can have all of these perspectives and you can value them. But then the other thing is that I think we've lost, and I'll speak for myself. It took me 50 years to realize my body is not only there to carry my head around. I was completely in my mind. A lot of discernment also sits in your intuition. But we've been taught that's fluffy gut feelings. But actually, I think if you can learn also to, what am I experiencing in my body now that I need to make this decision, not only in my mind, but that is something that we've unlearned. And I think it's critical that we almost befriend and learn to listen to our intuition again.
Which, by the way, is one of the things that's advisable if you're in a luminal space, is to be more in your body and to be more grounded, because then you tolerate it better.
Well, I think that grounding is a practical example. So working with a customer, and they're building out some AI proof points, and the view that what does success look like, and it's always a struggle on projects. What is the definition of done?